The morning brief at Ridgeback Station started at 0600, and Specialist Ava Kreis arrived early enough to count the chairs. There were 32 of them arranged around the long table in the planning center's main cell, a low, wide room that smelled of recycled air and dry erase solvent, its walls lined with tactical screens still cycling through overnight updates. Kreis was 22 years old and 11 weeks into her first Joint Force assignment, which meant she sat at the far end of the table, nearest the door, and kept her notepad open and her mouth shut. Around her, the operators and staff officers of the Joint Cell filed in: SEALs, Army and Air Force liaisons, 2 Navy intelligence leads, and a rotating crew of senior planners who had been running cross-theater operations out of this station since before Kreis had finished signal school. She recognized maybe a third of them by name. She recognized all of them by posture. The last person to arrive was not in uniform. She came in quietly, the way people enter a room when they are trying not to interrupt it. She was young, late 20s, Kreis guessed, maybe a year or two older than Kreis herself, in civilian clothes, dark trousers, a plain gray jacket, a worn canvas bag over one shoulder, no rank, no insignia. She paused just inside the door, scanned the table once, and moved to take the empty seat 2 chairs down from Admiral Westbrook at the center of the room. She had barely set her bag down when Lieutenant Commander Rafe Don looked up. Don ran the operational planning side of the Joint Cell. He was broad-shouldered, efficient, and constitutionally impatient with anything that was not squared away before the brief began. He looked at the young woman in civilian clothes occupying a planning seat, and he reached across the table and set a manila folder in front of her. A runner's packet, the kind handed to administrative liaisons before they were redirected to the side room. Civilian technical liaison, he said. It was not quite a question. Yes, sir, she said. Logistics and signals support is coordinating in room C. They'll get you sorted. He nodded toward the door. We're about to go live. The woman looked at him for just a moment, not long enough to be a challenge, not so briefly that it looked like flight. Then she picked up the folder, took her bag, and moved to the seat along the wall beside the door. Watched her settle into it, back straight, bag on her knee, hands still. She did not look at her phone. She did not look at the floor. She watched the screens and she waited, and nobody in the room looked at her again. The brief ran for 40 minutes. Operation Coldarch, named, Kreis had been told, for classified predecessor program she did not have clearance to read, was in its 4th day of execution. A joint element of 22 operators had moved to Phase 3 overnight. A narrow surveillance corridor along a contested ridgeline, accessible from only one approach, with a signals relay point that had to be held for a 6-hour window before the exfil package could bring them out. The grid coordinates had been calculated months in advance, during the operations design phase, and written into the mission architecture at the highest classification level. The planners at the table knew Phase 3 in broad strokes, the exact grid sequence for the relay correction, the 47-character string that would allow the forward element to shift the relay point in real time if the original position was compromised, had been compartmented to a single originating source. That source had transmitted it at the start of Phase 1. Everyone in the planning cell assumed the forward element had it stored. Everyone in the planning cell was wrong. The call came in at 0742. Static first, then the element lead's voice, flat and controlled, reporting that the primary relay position was compromised. Enemy movement along the west nexus. They needed the correction grid, immediately, to shift the relay point and hold the 6-hour window. Without it, the Phase 3 clock would collapse. Without the clock, the exfil package had no valid window. Without the window, 22 operators were going to sit on that ridgeline for another 18 hours with no air cover and degrading comms. The planning cell went to work. Don called for the originating transmission. The signals tech on duty pulled the Phase 1 file and ran the decryption sequence. The decrypted grid came up on screen, but the correction formula had been compartmented separately. At a classification level, the Ridgeback Station system was not cleared to auto-retrieve. Someone had to reconstruct it manually from the operation's original architectural logic. The 2 intelligence leads looked at each other. Don looked at Admiral Westbrook. Westbrook looked at the screen. The room had been silent for 11 seconds when the woman by the door spoke. November Kilo 7, Foxtrot 3, Correction Index Delta through Romeo. She said it clearly, without standing, without raising her voice above the level of ordinary speech. Bearing 2447, elevation offset plus 31, relay shift 90 meters northwest. Full string is November Kilo 7 Foxtrot 3, Delta Uniform, Whiskey November 14 Sierra Romeo Bravo, 06 Tango Lima Echo 29 Foxtrot Oscar Alpha Delta Kilo Julia Hotel, 1 Sierra Tango Uniform November Foxtrot 3 Charlie Romeo. 7 characters. No hesitation. No paper. Don turned in his chair. The signals tech froze with his hand over the keyboard. He stopped writing. "Transmit it," Admiral Westbrook said. But the tech transmitted it. The acknowledgement came back in under 90 seconds. Element lead confirming correction received. Relay shift confirmed. Phase 3 clock holding. 22 operators on a ridgeline somewhere in the dark had what they needed. Nobody in the room moved. Westbrook pushed back his chair and turned fully toward the woman by the door. He was not a man who wasted words or motion. "Name," he said. "Vane," she said. Sarah Vane. Something shifted in Westbrook's expression. Not surprise exactly, but a rapid internal recalibration. The look of a man who has just been handed a piece of information that reorders several things he thought he knew. He turned to the terminal behind him and typed a clearance string. The screen populated. He read it. He read it again. Then he said, quietly, to no one in particular, "Someone get the room." The file that came up on the main wall screen was marked at a classification level Christ had never seen applied in a live briefing. What was visible, the unredacted portion, the summary, filled 2/3 of the screen. Operation Cold Arch, original architect, Major Sarah Vane, Army Special Operations Command, classified track, 23 months solo. Embedded across 3 separate theater areas. Youngest woman to hold the Army's classified long-range surveillance and interdiction record. The grid architecture for Phase 3, every compartmented formula, every relay correction string, designed by her, personally, 14 months before the operation had been assigned a name. She had been promoted to major at 28. Call sign at the top of the file read, Cold Arch. The operation had been named for her. Christ stared at the screen. She thought about the folder Dawn had handed her. She thought about the seat she had been waved away from. She thought about the 11 seconds of silence while trained intelligence officers looked at each other, and a young woman in civilian clothes sat by the door and waited to be asked. Westbrook stood up. He did not give a command, he simply stood. The 2 intelligence leads stood. The Air Force liaison stood. The Navy planners stood. The operators rose from their chairs, one after another, in a silence so complete that Christ could hear the ventilation in the ceiling. 31 people coming to attention in a room that had spent the last 40 minutes not looking at the person who had designed everything in it. Don was the last. He stood slowly, and he did not look at the floor. He looked at her. And the color had left his face in the way it leaves a man who has understood something about himself that he would rather not have understood. He stood straight. He held it. Sarah Vane did not move from her chair by the door. She did not smile. She did not look at Dawn with anything that could be called satisfaction, or at the room with anything that could be called triumph. She looked at the wall screen, at the operation she had built, the grid she had memorized, 22 names that were going to come off that ridgeline, and her expression was the same one it had been when she walked in. Level, quiet, settled. Westbrook said, "Major Vane, I apologize for the confusion. The element is holding," she said. "That's what matters." Reese wrote nothing in her notepad. There was nothing to write that the room hadn't already said, standing in silence, at attention, around a table that should have had one more chair. She thought about that for a long time afterward. About the folder, and the door, and the 47 characters spoken into the quiet by someone the room had decided, before she opened her mouth, wasn't worth listening to. She never made that mistake again.